The media is very happy to attack certain people for the crisis in Afghanistan. It's happy to attack Joe Biden and Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab for their mishandling of the crisis. But what the media is not happy to do is to look at the roots of this catastrophe and to look at the architects of this catastrophe, people like George W. Bush and Tony Blair and John Howard, who blundered into a situation they scarcely understood. Now, why won't the media focus on how this originated? Because they were entirely complicit in it. Now, we have to cast our minds back 20 years to the run-up to the war in Afghanistan. And it's hard to convey to people who weren't around then just quite what the atmosphere was like. In some ways, it was almost fascistic. It was as if we weren't living in anything that even pretended to be a democracy. The few of us in public life who said, we think this is a really bad idea, were demonized and vilified. We were accused of siding with the Taliban. We were accused of being against human rights. We were accused of being pro-terrorist. We were accused of being terrorists. We pointed out that a war on terror, an attack on an abstract noun, was effectively endless. There was no way that war could be concluded. There was no exit strategy from a war against an abstract noun. We pointed out that the grand words and gestures of people like George Bush and Tony Blair would collide with hard realities on the ground for which they simply weren't prepared. We weren't prophets. We couldn't see into the future. We could simply see that this hadn't been thought out right, and that war should be the last resort and not the first resort when you're trying to solve a problem. But we were shouted down, and this was an almost unanimous position in the media. I mean, it wasn't just the billionaire press. It was also the majority of voices in much of the so-called liberal media. But there's nothing unique about that situation. In fact, whenever war has been proposed, almost the whole media unites with one voice to support that war. And it felt very much like 1914, with all the brass bands blaring and the hats thrown into the air, and it's all going to be over by Christmas. In fact, there were actual promises that it was all going to be over by Christmas. It was as if nothing had been learnt from previous warmongering efforts by the media. So the question we should ask is, why is the media so bloodthirsty? Why does it repeatedly and consistently, across long histories, propose war as the first option rather than what it ought to be, the very last option? And I think there's several reasons. I mean, one is the interests of the proprietors, whose interests often overlap with those of the military-industrial complex. Profiteering and self-interest are never far away from these calls to go to war, apparently on behalf of great ideals. But I think there's also a factor which sweeps up almost all journalists, which is that journalism, to a very large extent, is about spectacle. And there's no greater spectacle than war. They love the flashes and the bangs.
This is the newest version of the missile.
Tomahawk can fly 1,000+ miles.
Each Tomahawk weighs about 3,500 pounds. So when 60 of them were fired towards Syria, that was about 210,000 pounds of firepower. So it swims and it flies.
Swims and it flies.
What is this thing and how much damage can it do?
It will collapse caves, it will blow up things.
And it's guided to the target by GPS.
So it's accurate?
Oh, it's precision accurate.
If you're alive afterwards, you're going to have perforated eardrums and a lot of trauma.
They say,
if it bleeds, it leads.
So let's have blood. Bloodshed is as attractive to journalists as it is to sharks, drawn to the killing of a whale so that they can engage in a feeding frenzy. And so you push for war, you demand war, you whip the nation up into war, and you position yourself as a hero. Here I am, rallying the nation, planting the flag, blowing the bugle, standing atop a pile of bodies and proclaiming freedom.
That is what freedom looks like. That's the red, white, and blue.
Well, one of my favorite things is watching bombs drop on bad guys.
And then as soon as things get a bit difficult, you quietly walk away and focus on the next issue. And that's another thing about the media, it's short-termism. It's all about today. And what happens next week, next month, next year, 20 years' time, that's completely irrelevant. It just fades away into the indeterminate future. And focus on the new thing which they're throwing in front of your eyes. Focus on this, get your eyeballs on this new bloodshed, which we support. Mind you, when they're pressed, they will try to attach some post-rational justification to the positions they took. A lot of the newspapers are focusing on at the moment is the rights of women in Afghanistan. We went in to defend the rights of women. Hang on a moment. Sorry, is this The Sun, the Daily Mail talking? The Sun, which at the time, on every day of the week on page 3, had a photograph of a topless woman. This is a Daily Mail whose strip of shame contributed to destroying the lives of women every day. Are these the organisations which were totally embedded in rampant sexism, in body shaming, in the hatred of any attempt to advance the rights of women? And now suddenly we have the billionaire press lining up to say, well, we had to go in to defend women's rights, that's why we did it. No, it is not why you did it. And no, you can't co-opt an issue in which you have no interest at all, no discernible track record of concern whatsoever, and try to claim that this is your issue because it isn't. There's a simple test of the claims by the media and of governments to care about the people of Afghanistan, and that is whether they're prepared to receive those who are seeking asylum as they flee from the disaster there. Well, by and large, they're not. Far from saying we should open our doors and welcome all those who are fleeing and seeking asylum, the refugees from Afghanistan, the media is almost united in saying we should shut the doors, turn back the refugees and sink their boats if necessary. They couldn't give a shit about the Afghan people. That's perfectly clear. It's all just a post hoc justification for their drive to war, because when they're tested, when they have the opportunity to show how much they care, they show perfectly clearly that they don't care at all. We were lied to consistently in the approach to Afghanistan, in the approach to the war in Iraq, in fact, in the approach to all of our colonial and post-colonial or neo-colonial wars. We are lied to. We are told a whole series of things which, even at the time, can't possibly be true, but we later find out are just arrant lies. And these lies are very seldom explored and exposed by the media. And so we blunder into the next disaster, having learnt nothing from the last one. We carry on lying to ourselves about this. I mean, we had the Labour Party basically saying this is all Dominic Raab's fault because he didn't make a phone call. Yeah, look, Dominic Raab is completely useless. He's a completely hopeless foreign secretary. He was lying on a beach when he should have been at work, when he should have been all over this issue like a rash, not least because there's a desperate need to get highly vulnerable people out of Afghanistan, which he totally flunked. But was he the author of this catastrophe? No, he wasn't even in politics when this happened. We have people blaming Joe Biden for getting out too quickly. Well, at least Biden is honest enough to say that actually wasn't a good time to get out. There's no good time to lose a war. But that's not the same as being the author of this catastrophe. The authors of the catastrophe were the people who got us into that war 20 years ago. They were Tony Blair, they were George Bush, they were John Howard, and they were the whole infrastructure of persuasion through the media barons, the proprietors of the newspapers, the decision makers in the BBC and the broadcast media in the United States.
America strikes back. Afghanistan is pounded with bombs and missiles from the air and sea.
These were the people who are guilty of that catastrophe. These are the people who caused the chaos which we now see today by plunging into a nation they scarcely understood, without a realistic plan and with no strategy for exit. And eventually, that was going to fall apart. And whoever happens to be not sitting on the chair when the music stops is the one who gets the blame for that. But actually, it's the person who set up the chairs in the first place. One thing has changed for the better in the past 20 years, and that's been the proliferation of alternative media. Media which allow people who have been warning about exactly these disasters to speak and to reach other people. And among those is Double Down News. So please become a patron, support Double Down News and Patreon.